What does it mean to be a leader in the church? More importantly, to whom is a leader in the church accountable? As Paul develops his argument in 1 Corinthians, these are the questions that take center stage now. And as he can sometimes be, Paul is a bit confrontational here, perhaps even borderline defensive. But it is something that the Corinthians needed to hear. Hello, I'm Stuart Baskin, pastor of First Presbyterian Church of Tyler, Texas, and this is your daily devotional for Thursday, March 17th, 2022. I have observed before that when we read Paul's letters, we are reading only one side of a two-sided conversation. Because we only have Paul's letters, we don't know exactly what the people on the other side of the conversation were saying to him. One of the challenges of reading only one side of a conversation like this is that there's a lot that Paul assumes in terms of the subject at hand. He assumes that the Corinthians know exactly what he's talking about, so he doesn't have to fill in the details for them, though of course we wish he'd fill them in for us. That leaves us a little bit in the dark at times. As a result, we have to draw some conclusions based on partial information to help us make sense of what he's saying. Now, we already know some important things about the Corinthians. They were a congregation divided by factions and loyalties. They were Greeks, meaning they were steeped in the culture of philosophical argumentation and debate. They thought in terms of status, meaning they thought about people as superior or inferior in their knowledge about the faith. All of these things created difficulties for Paul as he tried to help them grow in their spiritual journey. We also know that Paul had founded this particular congregation and that another evangelist named Apollos came behind him to help them grow and mature. One of the things this meant in practical terms was that Paul's early preaching and teaching to them would have been on a very rudimentary level. He was teaching them the theological ABCs, as it were. We can safely infer that Apollos picked up where Paul left off and began teaching them at a higher level. They could easily have drawn the conclusion that Paul's level of spiritual knowledge was lower than that of Apollos, but that would have been a false conclusion. Just because someone teaches an introductory course in some subject does not mean that person is unqualified to teach higher level courses. What seems to be at issue now is that some of the Corinthians were calling Paul's qualifications into question. Let's listen in on this brief portion from 1 Corinthians 4. Think of us in this way, as servants of Christ and stewards of God's mysteries. Moreover, it is required of stewards that they be found trustworthy. But with me, it is a very small thing that I should be judged by you or by any human court. I do not even judge myself. I'm not aware of anything against myself, but I am not thereby acquitted. It is the Lord who judges me. Therefore, do not pronounce judgment before the time, before the Lord comes, who will bring to light the things now hidden in darkness and will disclose the purposes of the heart. Then each one will receive commendation from God. What Paul makes clear here is that as a servant of Christ, he is accountable to Christ and to Christ alone. But why should he even have to say this? Actually, for the most mundane of reasons. People then, as now, want what they want. If Paul wasn't giving them exactly what they wanted in a teacher, they would have judged him as lacking or as deficient. Therefore, Paul had to dispel the notion that he was accountable to them for the content of his teaching. Instead, as a steward of the mysteries of God, Paul could only be accountable to God in Christ. Otherwise, he would have been tempted to alter the content of his teaching simply to please the Corinthians. That would be out of bounds for Paul. But the truth is that there were plenty of evangelists willing to do exactly this, to make the gospel message pleasing to their audience. Paul talks about this in a variety of his letters. And why is this? For the age-old reason of money and fame. Ministers even today often frame the gospel message to please their congregations. Really, it's just human nature, but human nature at its worst. To be a leader in the church, says Paul, one is responsible to present the gospel not as people want to hear it, but as it comes through the revelation of God in Jesus Christ. It may not always be the most popular thing, but for Paul, it is the only way to go. Speaking of potentially unpopular teachings, when we return tomorrow, Paul takes on the difficult subject of those who engage in immorality in the name of Christ. But for now, may God continue to bless you and keep you in all that you do this day and in all the days ahead.